Hello and welcome back to Fantasy Football by Ben. Today I'll be talking about my running backs again. This one's going to be 17 to 32, and I'll be comparing again to Fantasy Pros. And if you didn't watch the video yesterday, you should go watch my 1 through 16 running backs. And tomorrow I'll be posting my 1 through 16 wide receivers as well. Hope you enjoy. So for this one, I'm going to be starting off with my number 17, and that is Clyde Edwards-Helaire, also known as CEH. And I have him ranked at 17, and Fantasy Pros has him ranked at 14, and so we have a little bit of a difference, but I'm not as high on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He kind of disappointed a little bit last year, and he was a first-round pick in a lot of leagues last year, and he kind of disappointed, but I do think that he has a lot of value this year, and obviously he's a part of the Kansas City Chiefs offense, which is a very high-scoring offense, and I think they could be the best offense in the league potentially, and so I do think that Clyde Edwards-Helaire has a lot of value. I just don't see him as being a top 16 running back in fantasy. And obviously number 17 is still running back 2 in a lot of leagues, or in a lot of leagues, unless I guess if you're running a 6-man league or something, or 8-man league, I guess, then he's right outside of the top 2 running backs on most teams. And so I do think he's a really solid running back though. And if you have him on your fantasy team, you shouldn't be worried. I think that he can produce a lot, and last year we didn't really see a whole ton of catches out of him, and he was a huge part of that offense was like early on, but after week 1 he didn't really score that many touchdowns, or after week 2 he didn't score very many touchdowns, so I think that really hurt his value, and I think he could be better, but he didn't exceed expectations last year, and I thought he was going to be better than what he was, and so realistically I ranked him a little bit lower going into this season because I think that expectations for him should be a little bit lower. We shouldn't expect as much out of him. Last year he didn't do a whole ton of receiving, but I think he can, so maybe this year they bump up his receiving work a little bit more, and so we see a little bit more out of him this year. The guy I have at 18 is Myles Sanders, and I think obviously his value is going to go up if Deshaun Watson is the starting quarterback, but even if Jalen Hurts is the starting quarterback there, I do think that Myles Sanders has really good value around that 18 to 20 range for running backs. And so, if he's your running back too, I think that's really solid. But as long as he stays fully healthy, obviously. And like I said yesterday, and I'll say it again today, as long as all these guys stay healthy, I think they have some value for your fantasy teams. And so I have him at 18. Fantasy Pros has him at 19. And so I do think that he's a little bit better than the guy that's ahead of him at 18, and so that's why I ranked him at number 18 in my opinion. And I do think that his ability in that offense might be higher this year because last year with all these, they didn't have a whole ton of receivers, and they solely, he caught 45% of his passes last year, and it wasn't a very good season realistically for Myles Sanders. And so I do think that now that they have Devontae Smith as a weapon, I think that they potentially could look more towards having bigger gaps in the running game for Myles Sanders, which would really help him because last year I felt like they were stacking the box against him a little bit. And with Jalen Hurts obviously being the starting quarterback potentially this whole year, or Deshaun Watson, for example, and I do think that will really help Myles Sanders' value in fantasy this season because they both run the ball decently well. I don't think Deshaun Watson's he's known as a mobile quarterback, but I don't think he runs for a lot of yards, and I don't really know because Jalen Hurts wasn't the starting quarterback for the first 7 weeks of the season or 8 weeks, and so we don't really know how much he actually really will run the ball, but we expect it'll be a little bit, and it's probably going to be more than what Carson Wentz did, and so I do think that helps Myles Sanders' value, and also when Jalen Hurts is the quarterback compared to when Carson Wentz was the quarterback, Myles Sanders caught better percentage of his passes, and so I do think that having Jalen Hurts as quarterback will help Myles Sanders this year, but I don't know if it'll help him enough in that sense. And also getting Devontae Smith is a huge deal in that offense, and I think that only helps Myles Sanders. At number 19, I have DeAndre Swift, and Fantasy Pros has him at number 18, and so that's the guy I flip-flop with Myles Sanders. I don't know how I feel about DeAndre Swift yet. They seemed like they wanted to get another running back in that backfield besides DeAndre Swift. And so I do think that if they end up getting a guy like Todd Gurley, for example, I do think that obviously hurts DeAndre Swift's value, but I still think DeAndre Swift's a really good running back. I just don't know how good that offense is going to be, and I don't really know what kind of plans they have for him going forward. And so, as of right now, I feel okay about DeAndre Swift. I mean, I still have him as like a running back too, and so I do think that he'll be fine, but I don't know realistically how much I can overvalue him or expect out of him this season. And so right now I have him at number 19, and I mean, obviously he could move up further, but I don't know how I feel about him yet. And so we'll see a little bit later into the future, but right now I have him at 19. At number 20, I have Darrell Henderson Jr., and I think that he is a little bit interesting because obviously with the injury of Cam Akers, that puts his ADP up, average draft position, if you didn't know. And so I do think that people are kind of undervaluing where Darrell Henderson could go. And as of right now, I have him at 20, which is still a running back 2. I think that he's a really solid running back in fantasy, and he can be really good. And I think that in certain situations, he looked better last year, or looked like their best running back last year. And so I do think that if he can gain like a little bit more receiving work, and if he gets a lot of touches, potentially he could be even maybe a running back 1 around there. But I don't know what McVay's plan is realistically, and I don't know if they're going to shop for another running back because now that Cam Akers is out. I've heard that Todd Gurley could go there. I've heard Todd Gurley can go a lot of places, so I do think that is interesting if Todd Gurley goes back to the Rams. But as of right now, Darrell Henderson's their lead back, and I think at 20 he's probably pretty solid. Fantasy Pros has him at 21. I think that having him at 20 is perfectly fine. I think that because in either case he's a running back 2, potentially low-end running back 2. And so I do think that his value is very good from where he's being drafted. But we'll see what he's like when the season comes a little bit closer, and we'll see where he's being drafted in a couple weeks. At number 21, I have Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs is a little bit interesting because obviously they added Kenyon Drake in the offseason, and so obviously it's going to get some touches away from Josh Jacobs, which last year he was in top 5 in touches, so among running backs. And so I do think, and he missed some time even, but I do think that Josh Jacobs still will get a lot of touches, and they might become a more heavy offense or running heavy offense. And so I do think that them adding Kenyon Drake could be like a Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt thing, but also Kenyon Drake's not a huge pass catcher, and last year we saw Josh Jacobs get a bump up in catches, but I still don't think he's like a great pass catcher or is something that he really focuses on, or they focus on trying to get the ball to the running backs. And so I do think that hurts Josh Jacobs' value, adding Kenyon Drake, because it's just less touches for Josh Jacobs, but maybe he's more efficient with the touches. And so I have him at 21. Fantasy Pros has him at 20. I do think that he has value, but I don't know if it's going to be as good as Darrell Henderson as of right now, because obviously Darrell Henderson doesn't really have a whole lot of competition in his backfield. I mean, I can't even name somebody on the Rams backfield right now. They got rid of Malcolm Brown. They sent him to, or he went to the Dolphins, and Cam Akers is out. I can't even think of another backup running back behind Darrell Henderson right now. And so right now I think that Darrell Henderson's just in a better opportunity. And so I do think that he's a little bit ahead of Josh Jacobs, in my personal opinion. And obviously it's all preference to like what I think could happen versus what you think could happen. So if you think that Josh Jacobs is a very solid running back, that last year was just a fluke that he averaged 4 yards a carry or whatever it was, that he still is like a high-end running back, then hey, by all means, you draft him where you want to draft him. I'm not going to stop you. And nobody in your league is probably going to stop you from drafting him unless they draft him before you. And I just think that Josh Jacobs is going to be a little bit lower on the list than he was last year, obviously, because he didn't have much competition last year. And I'm just saying we haven't seen him catch a lot of passes in his career so far. And so we don't know what he's going to be like if he is their pass-catching back. Because then what's the point of them getting Kenyon Drake? Because they signed him, you know. And that's why I have Josh Jacobs at 21. At number 22, I have Mike Davis. And Fantasy Pros have him at 24. I mean, the Falcons run the ball a lot. They ran the ball a lot last year with Todd Gurley. And also, Mike Davis is a really huge passing offense or passing or receiving running back. And so I do think that he's going to factor into that passing game a lot. The Falcons, I mean, Matt Ryan led the league in attempts last year. And also, they did run the ball quite a bit. So I think Mike Davis is just going to flourish in that offense. I think he's a really solid running back, too, if you have him on your fantasy team. And as of right now, I think Mike Davis has the potential to play like Christian McCaffrey-esque type running back where his offense isn't like amazing, but he's going to get a lot of work and he's going to get a lot of passes and he's going to run the ball a little bit. I just don't think he's going to have the high volume that Christian McCaffrey has, but I think it could be like, and that's why he's a running back too, you know, that's why he's going off the board at 22 or 23 or 24 or 25 because he's not the Christian McCaffreys of fantasy leagues because he's not a league winner every week where he's scoring 25 plus fantasy points like Christian McCaffrey can do. And so I do think that Mike Davis's value is a little bit lower than Christian McCaffrey's, obviously, and I ranked a bunch of people ahead of him because of that. But I do think that Mike Davis could have a really high opportunity in this offense, and if they don't get anybody in the offseason still yet, then I think that there's a pretty high chance that Mike Davis could have a really good fantasy season this season. So I have him at number 22. At number 23, I have a guy that I'm kind of high on, and that's Kareem Hunt. I think that he's going to be a huge part of that offense like he was last year. And obviously, I think that they could play him and Nick Chubb at the same time, but they don't do that. And Kareem Hunt is a better receiving back, that's obvious. But obviously, still Nick Chubb's going way ahead of Kareem Hunt because Kareem Hunt is the backup to Nick Chubb. But I still do think that Kareem Hunt could have a really good season this year in fantasy. And so I have him at 23. Fantasy Pros also has him at 23. And I think that that's probably a really good spot for him because he's not the starter, but also last year he had 180 plus touches, and obviously Nick Chubb was hurt for 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and so I do think that if Nick Chubb stays healthy, then Kareem Hunt obviously won't get as many touches, but we saw what he did last year with 180 plus touches, so I do think that there's a possibility he gets that many touches again, and we know that Nick Chubb won't be on third down, really. And so I think that Kareem Hunt will have a really good, do a really good job on third down this year. And I think he'll be a really good fantasy running back, especially if he's a running back too. I think it's a really solid fantasy running back duo of Chubb and Hunt. I mean, I think they're both going to be very fantasy viable this year. And I have him at number 23, and so does Fantasy Pros. At number 24, I have Myles Gaskin. I think that his value is going to be a little bit lower this year than it was last year, and people might be drafting him where they thought that he should have gone or should be going last year from what he did last year, but he wasn't super efficient last year, and I think if he could be more efficient and if he's for sure the lead back this year, then I think 100% Myles Gaskin is a guy that should be going earlier in drafts, realistically, and I have him at number 24 because I think he's like the low-end running back 2 right now, and I think he's being a little bit overvalued because Fantasy Pros has him ranked at 22. I guess it's only 2 spots ahead of me, but still that could be a difference of like pick 2 in a round to pick 12 in a round, you know, and an 8-pick difference, you know, in players is kind of a big difference, and so I do think that if you get him at the end of like the 3rd or 4th round, I think that's a really good spot. Or beginning of 4th to the end of the 4th, I think that's a really good spot for Myles Gaskin. And so I have him at 24. I think he's still really solid running back as long as they don't bring anybody in. But if they bring some people in, I think that could diminish his value. And he's not really much of a goal line back, and that's why they brought in Malcolm Brown from the Rams. And so I do think that that's going to hurt his fantasy value, but also he's a phenomenal receiving back, but we just don't know what Tua is going to be like this year, and that also hurts Myles Gaskin's value, and that's why I have him ranked a little bit lower than where Fantasy Pros has him ranked. At number 25, I have a guy that I'm also high on, and I'm high on a lot of these running backs near the end of like the running back 2 run, and that's Chase Edmonds. I think that if they don't bring somebody else in, I mean, obviously they have James Conner, who I think will end up being their goal line back because Chase Edmonds doesn't really have the size for that. But as long as they don't bring somebody else in that could take even more carries away, I think that Chase Edmonds is going to be a really solid fantasy back. He just won't score a lot of touchdowns. And so I have him at 25. Fantasy Pros has him at 29. And so I do think that his value is a little bit better than 29, running back 29. But obviously Fantasy Pros thinks that he's a little bit worse than 25. And so I think that Chase Edmonds could be really good in fantasy, but we haven't really seen him have a big workload in his career, and so that's where I understand where they're coming from. And so I do understand what they're saying, but I personally think that Chase Edmonds could have a really good season this season as long as they don't bring anybody in like more than James Conner, because I think that could take a lot away from Chase Edmonds. And if he catches 45 passes this year and gets a couple receiving touchdowns and rushes for 800 yards or 900 yards, I think that he could be a really solid fantasy running back, especially if he's running back 2 or even running back 3. I think that he's really solid in that position, and so I have him at 25, and I think that that's a pretty good spot for him. At number 26, I have Damien Harris, and I mean, I don't know who New England's running back is going to be this year, but I'm assuming it's going to be Damien Harris, and so I think that they like to run the ball quite a bit, and they are going to have at least Cam Newton probably starting the first couple games, if not a little bit further into the season. And so I think that Cam Newton could help out Damien Harris. And Damien Harris was a really solid running back last year. I mean, he had a couple good games where he broke out. And so I do think that he's a solid running back. And I think they'll take advantage of that. And I could see him being a top 25 running back or 24 running back in fantasy, which if it's a 12-man league, that's a running back too. And so I do think that he has an opportunity to be that good, but we just haven't seen it in a full season. He didn't start off the year right away because he wasn't healthy. And so I do think that injuries obviously hurt. I have him ranked 26th, and so does Fantasy Pros. And so I'm probably still a little bit hesitant on drafting him, but at the same time, I think that he's a really solid running back, and that offense is only getting better from here because it wasn't great last year. And so I do think that New England's offense could get better. They did lose Julian Edelman, but I think that offense is still pretty solid. And they've added a couple pieces, and so I do think that New England's offense might be a little bit more run-heavy, though, this year. And Damien Harris could be a big part of that, and I think he will. At number 27, I have David Johnson. I'm a little bit higher on David Johnson than a lot of people are, and that's because even if they do lose Deshaun Watson or he can't play this year, I think that David Johnson is going to have still a pretty good solid season, and it's just because he's getting a lot of touches. And obviously, Deshaun Watson's a huge deal in that team, on that team, and if they lose him, that's a huge loss to their offense, but I still think that David Johnson will put in some good, productive games every now and then. Maybe not every game, but I think still he's going to be a solid fantasy running back next year. And as long as he stays healthy, obviously. And I think that he could be a really solid fantasy running back for your team if you draft him. And I have him ranked 27th, and Fantasy Pros has him ranked 33rd. And so, obviously, I don't know. Obviously, they don't know what that offense is going to be like without Deshaun Watson. I don't know either. I just assume that David Johnson will get a lot of touches, and that will somewhat, even if he's not productive, he's averaging 4.2 yards per carry or something, then even that is okay because he's just getting a bunch of touches. It's going to be like, what's his name? When Leonard Fournette was in Jacksonville, it was like that probably. And so I do think that even if he's not producing a whole lot of efficient runs on a lot of touches, I think that with the plus touches, it's going to be a good running back, even if he's your third running back kind of thing, where he's a solid third running back on your team. And if you need him when one of your running back gets hurt or you're on a bye week, I think he's a really solid running back, or even played in the flex. I think he's a really solid running back for your running back 3. I wouldn't draft him as a running back 2, but running back 3 for sure. I think he's a really solid fantasy running back. Just for his volume. I think he's got a lot of volume coming his way. Doesn't have a whole lot of competition. I mean, Philip Lindsay, I think, is always really solid, but I don't know how well how much he'll be able to run compared to what they're going to do with David Johnson. Because Philip Lindsay in his career is not really much of a receiving back, and David Johnson has been pretty solid as a receiving back in his career. At number 28, I have Javonte Williams, and most people are a little bit higher on this guy than I am. And I, again, like yesterday when I was talking about Najee Harris, I don't know how I feel about rookie running backs, but I do think that he's a little bit better than Melvin Gordon. And so, especially because Melvin Gordon has an average over 4 yards a carry, it feels like since like his second year in the league. And so I do think that he's got like a step over him in that way. Like, we don't really know what he's going to be like, so we should test him out and see what he's like. And they got a pretty good offensive line. And so I do think that this could be a year where they test him out. And I don't know who's going to be their quarterback between Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. And I think Teddy Bridgewater, if he's their quarterback, will end up throwing to the running back a little bit. And Javonte Williams could have a really good season doing that. But I don't know if he's going to be the starter right away. And that's my problem with him is I think he'll be the starter by the end of the season for sure. I just don't know if he will start the season as their starting running back. And I pretty much am guessing no, not starting the season right away. And so as of right there, I have him ranked 28th. I think he could finish really well. But Fantasy Pros has him ranked at 27, which is only a one difference. But I still think that if he's not starting the season, then he's not as valuable right away for you. And so I have him at 28. I think he could be a really solid fantasy running back by mid-season probably. But as of right now to start the season, I don't think he's a high-value running back that I would be drafting in like the 3rd round or 4th round or 5th round. Maybe the 5th, but I wouldn't draft him any earlier than that. All right, I know I'm going to botch this, so I'm just going to try to say it. Travis Etienne. Anyways, so Travis. I'm just going to call him Travis from now on. I think that his fantasy value he's being a little overvalued, and people are drafting him way too early. I just don't know what he's going to be like in that offense, and I don't know what James Robinson's going to be like. So I do think that Travis will be really good in fantasy. He's a good, amazing receiving back, but I just don't know if he's like a between the tackles kind of guy or if because his stature is very similar to Austin Eckler type, and Austin Eckler is not really much of a between the tackles type of runner, and maybe Travis could be better than him. He could be like a Christian McCaffrey where maybe he seems like a bit undersized, but then McCaffrey, obviously, he rushes for touchdowns and is an amazing receiving back. So maybe he could turn into that, but I don't know if he'll do that his rookie year. And that's the problem, is it's his rookie year. Again, the same thing that I was just talking about with Javonte Williams is I don't trust rookie running backs really. And so I do think that his value is going to be a little bit lower than what we think. And so as of right now, I have him ranked at 29. But I do think that if he takes the starting role away from James Robinson and he's like for sure the starting back, I think that that's really solid for your fantasy team. And if he's a running back 3, I think that's really good. But I just don't know if I trust that he will be the running back to start the year. But Fantasy Pros has him ranked 25th. And so obviously like that just shows me that people are higher on him than I am. And maybe that's okay. But if you want to draft him, and like I was saying with Javonte Williams, if you want to draft him in the 4th or 5th round, I personally probably won't do that. But I see that he is going there. So if he's like there and you're like, well, this is a good spot where I think he could be a really good value pick, then that's your call. And I'm personally not going to pick him in there, but I think that if he's there in like the 6th or 7th, it's really value. So I do think that he has value. I just don't know if it's as much as people are thinking it is. And then at 30, because I really don't know what that offense is going to be like, I have James Robinson. I do think that he will start the year, and then they're just going to try to get Travis involved into the offense, but I really don't know. And last year we saw James Robinson could receive passes, and so them drafting Travis in the 1st round kind of threw me off. And so I don't really know what that offense is going to be like. I know Trevor Lawrence and Travis played together in college, so obviously they're going to like be really good pals, and he might throw him a lot of passes or whatever. And so I do think that it's going to be interesting to see what that Jacksonville offense is like and who they're going to have their lead back. I think I would almost rather have Travis because of the potential that we don't know. But I think James Robinson's still a solid pick, at least for the first couple weeks. And as long as they don't get rid of James Robinson out of the offense, I think that he could be a really solid fantasy running back for almost the whole season, this next season in fantasy. All right, at 31, I have a guy that I'm a little bit low on compared to Fantasy Pros. Fantasy Pros has him at 28, and I have him at 31, and that's Raheem Mostert. I think Raheem Mostert's a phenomenal running back. Might be the fastest guy in the league. I mean, obviously Tyreek Hill is really fast, but might be the fastest running back, I should have said. But Raheem Mostert, I think, is a really solid fantasy running back. He just can't stay healthy, it seems. And so with Jeff Wilson out this year, I do think that, and no Tevin Coleman anymore, so I do think that this is Raheem Mostert's backfield to lose, and he could lose if he gets hurt, because obviously everybody's really high on Sermon, and so I think that as long as Raheem Mostert stays healthy, I think he could end up being a high or a running back 2 in fantasy, which means that he moves up to the at least 24 spot roughly. And so I do think that going forward, I think Raheem Mostert will be the one that I would draft if I'm drafting between the two of them, if I'm picking between the two of them. But I do like the unawareness of Trey Sermon. And so I do think that overall, the fact that we are picking him earlier than Mostert is kind of confusing me. But at the same time, it's probably okay because we really don't know who's going to be the lead running back that year. I'm assuming it's going to be Mostert, and that's why I have him ranked and not Trey Sermon. And so I do think that Mostert will be the starting back to start the year. But if Sermon takes the spot, I think that it wouldn't surprise me. And Mostert, there's a high chance he gets hurt. He's been getting hurt the last couple of years, knock on wood, that he doesn't get hurt. And so I hope he doesn't get hurt, but I think there's a chance that Mostert won't be the starting back by the end of the season. At number 32, I have Zack Moss, and people really are kind of undervaluing the running back position for Buffalo because of what Josh Allen does, and that's take a bunch of touchdowns away from running backs because he likes to run in the red zone. And so I do think that in general, Zack Moss is being a little bit undervalued, and I think that there's a pretty good chance that he becomes the lead back. I mean, Devin Singletary didn't run the ball inside the 10-yard line, 20-yard line very often last year, 3 times. And Zack Moss pretty much had 25 carries inside the 20-yard line. So I do think that if there's a chance of him getting a bunch of touchdowns and him being your running back 3, I think that's really solid value for a running back 3 at the 32nd running back, or where he's going on Fantasy Pros is 35th. So I think that you get a lot of value out of him, and I think that people are undervaluing Zack Moss a little bit, and I personally think that Zack Moss will have a really good season, and as of right now, I have him at 32. He could move up further because I think Buffalo's offense is going to be so good this year, and they're going to score a lot of points, and Zack Moss, I think, is going to be a big, huge guy that's going to be a part of that offense. So I do think they have a really good chance, or he has a really good chance of being a running back 2 potential. And so if he's scoring touchdowns like crazy and Josh Allen's not running as much, I think that really helps Zack Moss, and I think he could be a really solid fantasy running back this year. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe if you're new. I'll see you in the next video tomorrow. I'll be doing my wide receivers 1 through 16. I hope you enjoyed. Peace.